Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Laithwaite's Wine, the official wine partners of the ECB. Laithwaite's stop at nothing to bring you great wines and have done so for over 50 years. As part of our partnership, you are able to get 25% off 6 or more bottles when using the code Wisden at checkout. A bumper show coming your way today, folks, with not just one, not just two, but 3 pre-recorded conversations coming away. We'll be talking about Jason Roy's England career after the 2019 World Cup winner was dropped at the last minute ahead of the 2023 tournament. There's a special performance from Mohammed Siraj in the Asia Cup final. India continue to look ominously good. The County Championship is in the midst of a crucial penultimate round, while the England men's and women's team have either just finished or are about to finish their international summers. There's all of that, plus a chat with Kemar Roach about not only his Surrey team that could be on the brink of winning the championship for the second year on the bounce, but his view on the state of West Indies cricket and the state of Test cricket. Absolutely loads to get our teeth stuck into this morning. I'm Rana, and with me today is Joe Harman, Ben Gardner and Katya Witney. Mark Butcher will be joining us later on. Joe, the big news this week for England was that Jason Roy has been left out of their World Cup squad. The right decision in the end?
I think it is the right decision, but reached in the wrong way. I think we all forecast this a few weeks ago, that with Harry Brook on the fringes, there was a chance that someone might miss out. We thought Milan might be that player. Katya obviously didn't, but the rest of us thought that might happen, or perhaps potentially should happen. Obviously, Milan silenced any doubters again over the last couple of weeks with some outstanding form. But then by the time we got to the 15 being selected, Jason Roy's back problems, the fact he hasn't played much cricket at all for a while, meant that I think England had to make this decision, especially with Milan now set to open. Brook, they obviously thought was a more versatile option who could go up top, go in the middle order. But I don't know why they didn't just pick a bigger squad, like, for instance, Australia did, picked 18, then cut it down to 15 at the last minute. England could have picked 16, 17, rather than putting Jason Roy in your World Cup squad and then dumping him and probably calling time on his international career. It's a sad end, and I think the Rob Key group hasn't made too many mistakes since he took over, but I think this was one, and an unnecessary one, really. If they just thought this through a bit more clearly. But yeah, I think in the end they have got to the right decision, but I can see why Jason Roy would feel pretty sore about it.
Mixed messaging, because at the start Luke Wright said that 15 was going to be the 15, and then very, very quickly Matthew Mott gave that interview on Sky where he used the word provisional about 15 times in 10 minutes. Ben, you broadly agree with that?
Yeah, I guess so. I think on balance it's just about the right decision. I guess in terms of how Jason Roy will feel, no player likes their international career coming to an end. I think there's no nice way to do it. England could have handled this a bit better, and there was slight mixed messaging, but also I think that it's just that it's a tough decision and it's going to feel hard on whoever it is. I guess what it does say is that it just re-emphasizes again just how England are just less settled this time. You can't imagine any player could have had form good enough to basically break into that side ahead of. I suppose Bairstow did sort of a bit, but that was a very different circumstance when he got over Hales. When England were sort of on that run into that World Cup, you'd have had games where people would have sat out and rested and rotated and that sort of thing, but there wouldn't have been any sort of form that could have disrupted that top 6 as it was then. Hales was coming in 2018, was it, and making the highest score in the world record ODI total, and England still knew that Bairstow and Roy were their openers. And now it's like Roy's actually had a decent year in ODI cricket, not but his form overall has been bad. He's certainly left the door open. But it's the fact that England are just that much less certain as well, which is strange compared to last time. I guess it was just so much more built into last time, and that was much more sort of a clinical build-up, I suppose, which this hasn't been. I think it is the right decision, but it's also, it's just weird to think about how they've kind of actually got into this position where they are making a decision based on 4 ODIs, which we kind of thought before they happened like wouldn't matter a huge amount, kind of thing, that it was for fine-tuning. This is actually almost like ripping out the engine and putting in a new one, right? So this is a big decision. This isn't a small tweak.
I mean, Roy's played more ODI cricket than any other England player since they won the World Cup. But as you say, his form has opened the door for someone to come in. And Katya, that person is Milan. I mean, Paul asked, how smug is Katya feeling that she was the only one that backed out in Milan for the World Cup squad, and now he's a guaranteed starter on the team sheet?
Pretty smug, I would say, for those not watching on YouTube.
Unbearably smug. I think that's the right.
But it's the sheer volume of runs that Milan scored is the reason that it forced England to make a decision. And once Milan sewed up that spot at the top, they then had a decision to make between Roy and Brook. And actually, a big part of it is Roy just hasn't batted for very long at all recently because he missed this series, and before that hasn't played ODI cricket for a long time. But it's on Milan. You called it at the start of the series, but he had probably his best game at the end of the series, that 100 at Lords when England got 311. Just an amazing series for Milan.
Yeah, I think he did what he's been doing for the last 2 years, which is consistently scoring big runs. Like he got 96 at the Oval and then obviously the ton at Lords. I think the most pleasing thing about what he's done in the series is that when Buttler asked the batters to go harder, that's what Milan did. And one of the criticisms of Milan is that he doesn't go hard enough at the start of the innings. But if you look at where England are now compared to where they were 4 years ago, that Roy Bairstow opening partnership worked really well because they could afford to go hard from ball one, and if it didn't come off, sometimes it didn't really matter because there was enough coming behind them and they were fine-tuned enough to make up for that. This batting lineup looks a lot more unstable than it was 4 years ago, mostly because they haven't played enough ODI cricket to get as settled as they were. So to have someone like Milan who can both act as kind of like an anchor role and also attack towards the end of the innings is kind of the perfect situation for them to be in. And it is harsh on Roy, but he's not what England need at this point in time. And I also think it should be mentioned that there's nothing to say that if Roy's back hadn't been injured that he wouldn't have come in and scored a couple of centuries as well. It's circumstantial, but that's how it goes in international cricket. Sometimes people have fitness issues and come in and out, and that's kind of how it goes. But for what they need right now, Milan best fits that, and being as consistent as he is, he's probably the most consistent batter in their top six. That's just how it goes, and Milan's the better option.
I can understand why England was so keen to hold on to Roy just because of how good he was in 2019, in the run up to 2019. He averaged 63 in that World Cup win at a strike rate of 115. And I think one thing this England team, I don't think are currently capable of that they were in 2019 was just winning games in the first 15 overs, basically, like the run chase against Australia in the World Cup semi-final, even the game against India where Bairstow and Roy put on like 160 of not much at all. We've talked a lot about the makeup of the top six. What about the bowling? Joe, who do you expect to start in that bowling attack? You see, Wokes will expect to start. Rashid, if fit, will start. Wood, if fit, will start. But other than that, it's not necessarily clear.
I think they really like Topley. I think since Buttler and Mott have been in partnership, Topley has played pretty much all the games that he's been fit and available for. I think he would have played a big part in the T20 World Cup, but then injured himself standing on a boundary marker, wasn't it, ahead of the tournament? Yeah. So I think they like the look of him. I think Atkinson is probably one out from the side. It also depends on the balance. If you play Curran, Livingston and Moen, which is possible, then we've already got our quicks with Topley, Wokes and Wood. If they go for the two all-rounders, then that maybe opens the door for Atkinson or possibly Willie. I think Atkinson is maybe just ahead of Willie and Topley's ahead of both of them, would be how I'd see it. But I think there will have to be rest and rotation in this tournament. There's a lot of travel involved. It's a long old tournament, as we've talked about. Another thing that I don't think worked in Jason Roy's favour, I just don't think you can take a semi-injured player on a tournament like this. England's bowling, I think, is going to have to be flexible. And overall went pretty well against New Zealand. I think Topley looked really, really good. So encouraging signs, I think.
Katya, what do you think? Sam Curran's an interesting one. He was player of the tournament the last time England played a white ball competition. Obviously, different format. England could have an amazing batting depth if you have Curran at 8, Wokes at 9. Do you see Curran forcing his way into the starting 11?
Potentially. I think England have got so many left armers, so they've got David Willey and Topley and Curran, so that kind of point of difference isn't what's going to get him into the 11, and I'm not sure how on Indian pitches Sam Curran's going to go, but as you said, he was so good in the T20 World Cup and he went okay against New Zealand. It's definitely a possibility. I don't think he's quite there yet, and I think having someone like Wokes, I'm not certain whether they get into the same side. If you're thinking about Topley and also maybe one of Mark Wood playing Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid, and then if you also play Liam Livingstone, it's difficult for him to force that his way into the side. But it goes to show kind of England's strength in depth, that you can have someone like Sam Curran who is a match winner, not just for his bowling on the bench. So it's definitely a possibility. The one that slightly concerned me against New Zealand was Gus Atkinson. I guess because he's kind of the unknown in ODI cricket. And
I thought he bowled really well.
He bowled okay, but that's my point. I think it was kind of okay, and it wasn't that kind of express kind of.
I thought he bowled really well because I know his numbers weren't great, but he's only bowling in the middle overs, and I think he caused really good players a lot of problems, and I think that England. So a part of the issue, I think, with Sam, issue is probably too strong a word, but with Sam Curran, I don't see when he's going to bowl. I think he's really good with the new ball, as you say, and I agree with you that him and Wokes in the same side, I'm not sure how they both fit in, but I can see Atkinson doing a job in the middle overs, and that's why they'd pick him.
Sure, but I think that when they picked Gus Atkinson, it was more to be that kind of jump starter who comes in complete unknown and just kind of takes everyone by storm, and he just didn't quite look like that for me. So sure, he could do an okay job, but I think we were all hyping him up before the ODIs, and it's kind of like a bit back down to earth of, yes, he bowled well, but he's maybe not going to be that kind of absolute front runner.
He's not going to do what Jofra Archer did in 2019.
And I think that's kind of what people were building him up to do, and that's not necessarily the case.
I think so much on Atkinson depends on Wood's fitness. He feels kind of like Wood's backup. I mean, they could play together, but I think Atkinson will more than likely step in when Wood needs a breather, which I think he will. If, God forbid, Wood got an injury in the next few weeks, then I think Atkinson could have a really big role to play in India, and we just don't know how that's going to shape up.
I think it's just one of those things that England are going to have to figure out as the tournament goes on, basically. Like, I don't think they know, if they were playing a World Cup final tomorrow, what their best attack, what the best balanced side would be. I don't think they know if they need that extra batting depth in Curran at 8, or if they want the left arm of top, if they want the extra pace of Gus Atkinson. I think they'll actually want to kind of experiment as much as rest and rotate through the group stage. I mean, if you look at who's played the most among the seamers since the last World Cup, Sam Curran's number 1 and David Willey's number 2. Like, Wood's only played 8 ODIs in that time. These guys have played so little together that I just don't think they know yet. And actually, you do as much as, you only need one bowler to bowl at one time. They wouldn't want to figure out who can take the new ball on Indian pitches.
And in 2019, England had an 11. They changed that 11 once in the World Cup. And obviously, Vince came in when Roy was injured. It doesn't feel like England are going to be as rigid with the team they pick. They're not going to have one team for the whole tournament.
Yeah, and even when they changed that 11, even though it was a seamer coming in for a spinner, it was still bowling almost the same overs. Like, Mo and Ali's role was to keep things really quiet in the middle overs, and wasn't quite doing that. So they brought in a guy whose role was to take wickets in the middle overs, and Liam Plunkett, and he did do that. Whereas I don't know if England even know what, say, Gus Atkinson, I mean, hopefully he can be a middle over wicket taker, but it might be that actually he turns out to be a new ball weapon, and England don't know the things that they would like to know about their bowling attack. And I think they're going to try and find this out in the 9 games before the semi-finals, if they get there.
I was looking this morning at when people bowled during the 2019 World Cup, and Wood bowled a lot in the middle overs, and I feel like there's a potential that he did that job so well, and I wonder actually he might also be given the new ball on this side depending on who they pick. So I think I don't get a sense that England definitely know who's going to bowl when. Obviously, if they've got 3 spinners rather than 2, that changes things as well. Joe Root has been added to the England squad for the opening game of the Ireland series at his own request in a bid to regain some form. Joe, we could see debuts from 4 players: George Scrimshaw, Sam Hain, Jamie Smith and Tom Hartley, who's been added to the squad. Out of those 4, I guess, or some of the guys who've not played much international cricket in the squad, who are you excited to see?
Most excited to see is Jamie Smith. I think of that quartet, he's probably closest to getting into a first choice squad in the next couple of years across any of the formats, really. When you speak to players around the circuit, they think very, very highly of him. So Mark Ramprakash was speaking to Tim Murtagh for his latest column about the players he's found most difficult to bowl at in the county championship this year, and he said James Rew and Jamie Smith were the 2 that jumped out for very, very different reasons, almost kind of diametrically opposed reasons, but that Smith is very, very quick on anything that's slightly over pitch, slightly short, and it's just really good to watch, as we've seen here at the Oval. And I'm really pleased that Sam Hain's got a shot. It might well be this is his only shot because there are so many players ahead of him in the pecking order, and he isn't quite the basher that a lot of the players are in the England side. Not to say that he's not a fluent scorer, because he absolutely is, but this might be it for him. But if it is, I'm still glad that he's got his opportunity, because when someone scores as many runs as he has done in county cricket, you feel like you do deserve a chance.
Ben, it's a strong Ireland squad. Josh Little, Paul Sterling, Harry Tector, all involved. Harry Tector in particular is someone that people might have heard a lot about, but other than that Lord's Test earlier in the summer, might not have actually seen. He's not just the next Irish batting talent. He's probably he's got the potential to be Ireland's greatest ever batter. Yeah,
in terms of the cross-format ability he has, I was actually he's actually got an ODI 100 in England. I was in Chelmsford to watch Ireland play Bangladesh earlier this summer, and Ireland actually lost that game, but it was an amazing innings in terms of the range of strokes he had, just how regularly he was clearing the ropes. He could be like kind of a superstar in a way that the likes of even Paul Sterling and also, Ed Joyce going further back haven't quite been. I know he's got admirers in when India played a T20I series in Ireland, I think last year. Hardik Pandya was captaining that, and after that he was kind of like this Harry Tector kind of wow kind of thing. So I wouldn't be that surprised. I mean, he if he ends up being the one that really makes a mark in the IPL, and also, but he's got the kind of the temperament to be a success in Test cricket as well, and more so than for other countries. Ireland need players who can switch between those modes, and he does look like maybe he could be that. So yeah, he's really exciting.
Well, next up we've got a chat with West Indies fast bowling stalwart Kemar Roach. He talks a little bit about Surrey and what makes them such a good side. They could win their second county championship title in 2 years over the next week or so. He also gives his perspective on how he sees the landscape of international cricket changing, and how, in his view, the love of Test cricket has already eroded among younger players. And after that chat with Roach, we'll hear from Mark Butcher on some of the stuff that Roach touched on. Kemar, it's great to have you on the show with us. It's your third season back at Surrey. It's a beautiful September morning. It's not always like this on a September morning, but what keeps you coming back?
Oh, the atmosphere, the dressing room, the people around the system. I think it's a fantastic system. I think everyone here goes out their way to make sure that all parties involved are comfortable. So, as I said over and over many times, from Mr. Stewart to Mr. Housey to the coaching staff, Batty and those guys, the captain Burnsley, they do a fantastic job of keeping all the players, happy, and making sure that our focus is just cricket. So what you see on the field is just a result of what's happening in the dressing rooms and behind the doors. So it's a fantastic setup, and I love coming back here, man.
So when you first came over, what did they do to make you happy?
The transitioning. I think the way Mr. Housey met me at the airport, obviously brought me to the flat I'm staying at. Explain everything. The clothes were already in the room. Everything was just smooth. The transition from obviously being in Barbados from the West Indies over here, it was just smooth. And it's a relaxed environment. Obviously it's high performance, but I think the guys just understand that the bigger picture is to win the county championship every year. So everyone comes in, everyone does their work, everyone is professional enough to understand that, yeah, it's a big deal, and we all come with that mindset that we're professionals. So it's been a fantastic transition, man. I think Mr. Howes and Mr. Stewart are amazing people, and they do a fantastic job of keeping me comfortable, man.
And on the dressing room, it must be unlike a lot of other dressing rooms in that there are so many players. They look at the Surrey squad at the moment for the last couple of games this season. You've got players like Ollie Pope's injured at the moment. Jamie Smith's going to be away with England. Some of the guys that go to the World Cup won't be around. The squad changes quite a lot during the summer, yet the atmosphere still seems to remain special throughout. What's that like to be a part of?
Yeah, it's great. I think the guys have been together for a while, so the camaraderie, the banter, the guys hang out a lot with each other, spend a lot of time in the dressing room, telling stories, obviously having a laugh and stuff. So that's good. That's a good environment to be in. And the younger guys that are in the setup, they feel like one of us. They don't feel like outcasts. So for us, it's good. It's good to see that coming into that dressing room and seeing all that. It makes you very comfortable, and it's, as I said, it's a very relaxed environment. And Mr. Batty and the coach is a fantastic guy, and he really thrives on getting everyone involved and everyone sharing. in the dressing room. So yeah, it's good, man. The youngsters come back in. All the guys that have obviously Pope has missed out, and a lot of guys have missed out because of injury or obviously commitments for England. But I think the other guys that are in the system are just as good, or going to be just as good in the future in order to replacement. So yeah, it's a good setup, man. It's a really good setup, and I'm happy to be here.
One of the things that's striking from the outside is that, as you say, the young players coming through do so well straight away. England guys get called up, and then someone from the Surrey Academy comes through. Seeing players like Tom Laws come through, Gus Saxon come through, Jamie Smith come through. What do you think it is about this place that produces so many excellent young cricketers?
Yeah, the system, I just said. The infrastructure, the programs that they have, obviously focusing on the younger kids coming through the ACE program. Everything is about focusing on the grassroots and getting that next superstar coming through for England cricket. That's the biggest picture, obviously, to get him to play for England and to perform for England. So I think the grassroots program here is amazing, and I can see why they put so much focus on it, because the Jamie Smiths, the Tom Laws, there's a lot of other guys. I think Nathan Barnwell, I'm a big fan of him as well. These guys are quality players at a very young age, and the more they stay in the system, the better they'll get in the future.
And you said earlier that the most important thing is winning, and you're winning quite a lot at the moment. So since the start of last year, you've won 16 county championship games, still 2 more to go this time round. You've played a lot of cricket in your career. What makes this side so good at winning?
The communication, the planning. It's clear plans coming from the coaching staff and the captain of what he wants or how they want to play. And we just focus on ourselves, just focus on what we can do to improve each game, and obviously keep our standards high. And I think our standard is extremely high, and it's a benchmark for a lot of counties around the circuit as to how we play our cricket. We look to win. That's the main thing. We always try to win every county championship game, and sometimes it doesn't work out, but that's okay. But if you have that focus in mind, you're going to win more often than not. So I think the infrastructure, the planning, the coaching, the facilities, everything is just top notch here at Surrey.
One of the defining things about the Surrey team is your bowling attack. You have a 5-man seam attack. What's that like just as a seam bowler yourself? Does that mean you get more of a rest? Does it mean you can be on the attack a little bit more?
It's good. It's obviously a very comfortable situation to be in. There's a very skillful group. Obviously, Dan World coming in. Jordan Clark has been exceptional for us for the last 3 seasons I've been a part of. Then you still have Jamie Overton, who recently just played Test cricket. There's Tom Laws, who I think is an exceptional bowler. Myself. I think the 5 of us have been doing a fantastic job. Gus obviously was a part of it before he moved on to be with England. So I think it's just a skillful group, and we get along well with each other. We try to keep ourselves on the park, try to be as fit as possible, and that's the main focus. That's very important. And just communicate and keep bowling as well as we can, and that's it. It's no really big remedy to it. It's just what we do as a group inside the dressing room is just talk, and we communicate well. So that's why the results are going pretty well for us.
One stat that I think is amazing this season is only one team has scored 350 against Surrey this season, so it's working pretty well. And how much do you guys talk about bowling plans as a group?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we do. Obviously, everyone sees things differently. We have Azhar Mahmood as he's one of the best bowling coaches I've worked with. Communicates well. He's obviously a great planner. He sees things very quickly, and he obviously lets the group know.
So like things in a batter's technique or like field plans, that kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah. He sees them very quickly, and he communicates with us. And then on the field, we see things as well. So, and obviously playing against guys every year, people pick up things about batsmen that they remember from the last season or seasons before. So I think, yeah, as a group, we communicate well, and that's why the results are being going well. That's honestly true.
I just wanted to ask you about Dan. He's not someone who plays international cricket at the moment, but he's had an amazing summer. He, one of the best away swing bowlers in the country. So yeah, just a few words about what it's like to open the bowling with Dan.
Well, it's a pleasure. Obviously, when he first came to the club last year, I played with him last year. He told me he's a big fan of me. He's looking forward to playing cricket. Obviously, opened the bowling with me at Surrey, and it's been working well for us. He's had a fantastic season. I think it's around 40 wickets now for the season. That's pretty good, but it's not surprising to me. He is a quality bowler. Surprised he's never been played much for Australia, but you can see the quality he brought from that setup in Australia over here to England, and he's made Surrey his home, and he's very happy. He's very comfortable. He works hard. He's an extremely hard worker, and Yeah, it's no surprise why he's doing so well, man. He's definitely one of the best bowlers in the circuit going around.
Yeah, you've played a lot of Test cricket. Where would Surrey? How would Surrey do as a Test nation?
Good question. I think they'll do pretty well, man. They have quality players. Obviously, Robbie Burns, you have Dom Sibley. Those guys have played Test cricket for England before. You have Ollie Pope, probably a future England captain. There's Ben Foltz, probably the best wicketkeeper in the world. Then you have guys like Dan Worrell, and I'll probably sneak in if I want me to play for Surrey as well. So, no, I think it's a quality group that can. I think they can be a pretty decent side in Test cricket. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen, but it is a pretty good question, though. I think they do a pretty good job in Test cricket.
And your reflections on just playing in the county championship, less Surrey specific, but just over the last few years, how much do you enjoy it as a competition? You know, obviously right now the Caribbean Premier League's going on, and you're over here. Obviously, two very different competitions. But what is it about the county championship that brings you back? Yeah,
just as I said, the club playing for Surrey. I don't know if it could play for anyone else. I honestly don't know. But the club, the atmosphere here, I think the competitive cricket as well. I think it's high quality cricket. I think it's the closest you're going to get to Test cricket. In terms of the juke ball in England, the movement you get is very challenging for the batters. Obviously, the weather, the green pitches, sometimes the flat ones too. But it is challenging. It is challenging cricket, and to be able to play 14 county cricket games over a 6-7 month period, it is quite strange on the body because there are other tournaments as well in England. The 100, the T20 Blast, and the NatWest 50, and there's a lot of going on in cricket in England. So to be able to play 14 first class games here at high quality and then winning the trophy, I think it speaks wonders for how good the cricket is in England, man.
We've got a World Cup coming up in a few weeks' time, and West Indies are obviously not in it. You know, a team that so many people around the world fell in love with the game because of the West Indies. It's a 10-team competition, and they're not there. As a West Indies legend yourself, how do you reflect on that state of affairs?
Yeah, disappointing. Obviously, it's the first time we've not been able to qualify for the World Cup. I know the guys are pretty disappointed about that. But it speaks a lot. It says a lot to us as in what we need to do to improve our cricket back home. I'll be honest with you, is not at the best. Is not the quality of cricket at home, and the infrastructure and stuff is not great, and a lot needs to be done. People need to sit down and have serious conversations in terms of making things happen, not just talking about it, but making stuff happen in terms of improving the cricket in the Caribbean. This is definitely an eye opener. Obviously, our struggles with our T20 cricket, the World Cups as well, not qualifying. It's all a build up of what has been happening back home, and it's no transparent. Everyone is seeing it now. So I really, really hope that for the next 4 years, people that are in charge of Western cricket really sit down and have a serious conversation and start acting on it. Start acting on these words in terms of improving the cricket. And there's a lot that needs to be done. A lot of simple things that need to be done. And
God, if Kemar Roach is in charge of West Indies cricket, what are the structural things that...
Oh, boy. You could be here all day, man. It's simple things, man. The pitches need to improve. I think West Indies cricket goes highly on their fast bowling. We've known for our fast bowlers for years, long before us. And there are talent. There are some serious talent in the Caribbean that wants to improve, that wants to get better. But we don't have facilities, we don't have the pitches to accommodate that. So for me, that is definitely the first order. If I was president or if I was in charge of Western cricket, the first thing I'll focus on improving the quality of pitches and facilities in the Caribbean, and try to get the most out of the younger guys' talents, and obviously try to help them improve as much as possible, as quick as possible. That's where you're going to get quality players that can be good enough for the highest level. So that's definitely number one on the list for me.
And then moving sort of bigger picture, Ricky Ponting said last winter that for the first time in his life he was worried about the future of Test cricket. And there's a lot of like big things happening at the same time. The big three, England, Australia and India, are just playing each other more and more than they ever have done. There's a series coming up where South Africa are going to New Zealand, and they're not going to be able to take their first team because it's happening at the same time as the SA20. South Africa are playing 6 Test matches a year now when they used to play 10 Test matches a year. And obviously, you started playing Test cricket in 2009. Now we're into 2023. How worried are you about the state of Test cricket as a man who still thrives at the top of it?
Yeah, it's worrying. There's a lot of franchises around the world now. There's a lot of franchises. Cricket all year round in terms of franchise cricket. And let's be honest, people are looking after their livelihoods now, so they're chasing dollar, they're chasing money. And it's understandable. Cricket is a very short career. If you want to maximize your talents as much as possible and obviously earn to take care of yourself and your families, I can understand why people do that. So Test cricket now, obviously for the small nations like West Indies and I guess South Africa now, teams aren't getting much Test cricket. Only the big nations like the Indias, the Australias, the Englands, they get their 10 to 15 Test matches a year. But in terms of the smaller nations, some guys don't think it's feasible. You only play 6 Test matches in a year. That's not good. For me, my last Test match was against India. That was in July? And I'm not playing another Test match until January next year. So that's a long, long layoff. And we're going to Australia, which is probably the toughest tour you could ever go on. So it's like a long, long layoff. And I don't think there's no emphasis on improving Test cricket. I don't think people that are in charge of cricket are making any emphasis to improve it. Franchises have taken over, and that's the fact of it. And players are more going towards franchise cricket. I have a love for Test cricket. I think if you are a good Test cricketer, you can play any format. That's my belief. Once you're a good red ball cricketer, you can play any format. So I don't know what needs to be done, what people need to do to improve the state of Test cricket. But
do you worry about that love going away for future generations? If you're a young kid in Barbados and you don't watch West Indies playing that much, and then West Indies, when they do play, there's a massive gap between them, so they can't be as prepared as they could be against a country who will be 100% prepared for that series. And then for the young players coming through, if you're a brilliant young 23-year-old seamer, there are so many financial opportunities for you away from Test cricket. And it's not because you're deprioritizing Test cricket. It's just you're looking after number one.
Yeah. And
you end up not prioritizing it, but it's not an active decision. Do you worry that love might, for future generations of players, dwindle a little bit?
I think it's gone already. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think it's gone already. I think a lot of youngsters are more into T20 cricket. That's where they're excited about it.
These are young current professionals, do you think?
Yeah. Young current professionals. Well, some of the ones that I know, Test cricket isn't, I just say it's not feasible. They don't look at it as feasible. And it's bad. It's bad. When I grew up, that's the only thing I knew. Obviously, T20 cricket wasn't big at that time, but it was all about red ball cricket. And now, as you said, the ability to play and make a lot more money than you would make playing red ball cricket. I think guys are looking at that more than actually the love of the game and obviously what you can achieve in a career and create a legacy. It's all about the franchises, It's more attractive financially, obviously, entertainment-wise. So a lot of younger guys are dwelling towards the franchise cricket, which is killing Test cricket, I would say.
One thing that I've always wondered is that for the guys who only play franchise cricket, you're hopping from one tournament to another, that 4 weeks, you don't really have a base. You have a base away from home here.
Yeah.
Is there something more fulfilling in playing longer form cricket, do you think, and having a stable base for a longer period of time rather than sort of hopping from competition to competition, if that makes sense? Like that dressing room culture you were talking about here at Surrey, there's more opportunity for that to flourish when you're spending longer time together.
Exactly. That's what I'll say. I think obviously you spend time with people longer, then obviously you understand players better, and then you perform better. That's how I look at it. I understand the trials of a franchise cricketer. You know, traveling, I just said 2 weeks, 3 weeks, different states, different continents. But that's what they sign up for, I guess. But I like the fact that I can leave West Indies cricket, which is a decent base, to come to Surrey and have another decent base where I understand players. I've seen players 2-3 years over and over and over. I watched them improve. I watched them gradually get better, and it's pleasing for me. Of course, we would all love to have more money. That's a no-brainer. We all like to earn more for our careers, but I'm not in a franchise era. I'm obviously older than that now. I've moved on from that. So red ball cricket is what I have, and I'm enjoying it. I really do enjoy it. That's why I keep coming back to Surrey every year. So I do understand what the franchise cricket had to go through, but I would prefer a good base in terms of seeing guys over a period of time improve.
Do you have conversations like this within the West Indies dressing room, where you talk about all the different options and you talk about your worries about Test cricket? And
Yeah, we do, but it's just tiring now because there's no improvement. There's nothing happening, so we can't just talk about it, and then there's no actions.
Do you think the ICC should be doing more?
Of course, of course, it should be. They're the governing body of cricket, and a lot of people, I think, a lot of articles out that a lot of players. I just say Ricky Ponting say he's concerned about Test cricket. He's one of the legends of the game. So it's like there's a lot of concerning factors that should be taken seriously, but it's a governing body. They're in charge of what happens next, and we can talk as much as we want, but if they don't want to do anything about it, then they wouldn't.
Well, Kemar, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Best of luck with the rest of the season, and thanks so much for this chat.
Thank you very much.
Mark, we talk occasionally about the future of Test cricket. Kemar Roach is someone who's been playing Test cricket for 15 years now. Only Marshall, Ambrose and Walsh have more wickets than him. So when he's saying that he thinks the love of Test cricket has already gone in the next generation, there's almost no one more qualified than him to say that. And he says that he's worried about future Test cricket. He said that the ICC need to do more. As someone who obviously works very closely with the England Test team and watches a lot of them, what was your reaction to reading what Roach said?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was no surprise in hearing what he had to say, and of course you have to make the distinction between what is going on in the West Indies and Sri Lanka and places outside of the sort of the big three, in order to qualify those comments. I think the most stark thing about what he said was was along the lines that sort of the young players growing up don't feel the same way about Test match cricket as he does or as he did when he was growing up, and that the only path that they see in terms of a career, that they love the game of cricket and they want to play it and they want to be involved is through T20 and through franchise leagues. And you add up the time spent versus the money paid and the other opportunities in order to have a sort of like a longish career that is sustainable in terms of your standard of living. And if you're playing for the West Indies and they only play 6 Test matches a year, versus being available to play in any franchise league across the world 12 months a year, then the sums don't add up. And so what he's saying is I'm guessing is going to be the view for a lot of countries whereby Test match cricket is not viewed in the same high esteem and remunerated in the same way as it is in the big three.
I think the average cricket fan in the UK is probably aware of how the game's struggling elsewhere, but we just had an amazing Ashes summer. India or Australia come over nearly every summer nowadays. We're very lucky to get very entertaining Test cricket in England. Even when England weren't doing very well, home series were generally quite entertaining. We pack out crowds. Do you think, though, generally in the UK, people don't appreciate just how precarious the Test game is in the rest of the world, really outside the big three at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'll probably get a view of that come next summer. The West Indies are touring Test tour, Sri Lanka are touring, and you'll get some sort of an idea as to the thing that people will probably find a little bit difficult is if England sort of playing in their expansive way or whatever, completely batter a couple of touring teams on the back of what has been an incredibly competitive Ashes series and whatever. Now that might not happen, but the likelihood is that it will. And then the whole point of, I suppose, the whole entertainment side of Test match cricket comes from it being, an actual contest. But I don't think people really do appreciate just how difficult it is for those nations outside the big three to kind of be competitive, to keep hold of and pay their best players, to stop their best players from having their heads turned and deciding to jack it in altogether in terms of playing for their country in the long form of the game. And it really isn't up to the sort of like to England's fans to kind of to be to be worried about that sort of stuff. You know, they want to go out and watch cricket and enjoy it and love the game in the way that they've always done. But the people who kind of are guardians of the whole thing are letting them down badly, are letting down cricket fans across the world badly, not just the ones here, by allowing the situation to become as impossible as it has done. And it's not even by stealth, really. It's been staring us all in the face for quite some period of time. And until somebody really grasps the nettle, somebody that has the financial power to try and even things up a little bit, then it will continue to get worse until such a time as there is no Test match cricket beyond that played by England, Australia, and India. You know, even Pakistan. Pakistan, whose sort of love for the game in all its forms is as strong as it is anywhere else. You know, it can be a struggle there too. I mean, it will be a struggle there too if them and India don't get their stuff sorted out and they start playing against each other again. So look, the game has an enormous amount of challenge.
Roach wasn't just critical of the ICC; he was almost defeatist in, you know, like he acknowledges that for so long they haven't done anything. So who are the people who can change things? Because a lot of people are pointing out what's wrong, but almost everyone, however high profile they are, says it's not really on them to change it. So what's next?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we have ICC competitions, don't we? There is an ICC World Test Championship. There is an ICC T20 and One Day International World Cup. I mean, they're in charge. It really is on them. And it could, you know, you could make the argument that the nations, the big three, have a responsibility themselves to kind of like to put back, you know, whatever it might be, to be more generous in terms of the terms and conditions they offer for touring teams or whatever the hell it might be. But it's kind of on the overarching body to try and level this whole thing up. And there doesn't seem to be any will whatsoever to make that happen. You know, England relies very heavily, I would imagine, on Test match revenues and on Test match cricket being, you know, the spectacle that it is, maybe in a way that doesn't happen in other countries. So maybe it might be incumbent upon England's rulers and leaders to kind of to sit down and try and hatch out a plan to level up the playing field a little bit. But beyond that, I haven't really got any answers for you.
Moving on to some news from this week, Jason Roy was obviously left out of the England squad for the World Cup. You pretty much called it last week. If this is the end of his England career, or at least the end of his England World Cup career, how fundamental has he been to the shift from 2015 to now?
Yeah, he's been absolutely huge. I mean, the numbers, his career numbers are still phenomenal, even given the sort of the loss of form and productivity that he's had since the 2019 World Cup. And even then, you know, strike rate wise, he's still up above 100. You know, they're kind of revolutionary numbers, aren't they? We kind of take it for granted now because England have been doing it for such a long period of time. But you know, to be an opening batter in 50 over cricket, to have a strike rate of above 100, and to be capable of playing the sort of innings that he has been over the course of his career, he goes down as an England great, really, in the one day format. You know, Johnny Bairstow's up there with him, and he's still doing it. Fingers crossed. But it's been an incredible career, and a sad way for it to finish. But I think the way to look at it is, rather than sort of in sort of sadness about sort of the way that it has ended for Jason Roy. Obviously, very very sad for him that he won't be going to the World Cup. But given another era, even he wouldn't have been replaced because there simply wouldn't have been anybody behind him that as good or perhaps even better. And I think that's the way to look at it, as opposed to, you know, yes, it's harsh on Jason, but it's only harsh if you're not replacing him with somebody potentially who can do even greater things. And I think that's the situation we got to. If Harry Brook hadn't have been such an exceptional player, and albeit they don't do the same jobs, had Darren Milan not been you know, just such a reliable player and such a high quality one, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the fact of the matter is that people, if you drop off in this England white ball setup at the moment, then there are people snapping at your heels to come and take your place. So it's tough. It'll be very tough on Jason, but it's sort of like the back injuries, the form sort of plateauing over a long period of time has kind of done for him right at the last. And but he can look back on whatever he's achieved with England over the last what is it now? We're talking about 7 years, aren't we? With enormous pride, because he's been an absolute game changer.
And finally, we've got 3 ODIs left in the summer. So it's a strong Ireland side. England are going to be led by Zach Crawley. It's a pretty youthful England side, with the exception of Joe Root, who'll be playing at least the first of those games. Out of the guys who we might not have seen much or any of at international level, who are you excited to see in an England shirt?
Well, I mean, George Scrimshaw, I'm really excited to see him. Derby haven't had an international since Corky in 1992, so that's a big deal for for that club. But he's genuinely quick, an absolute giant of a man. And whilst probably has a little bit of learning to do, it has all the raw materials to be an absolutely terrifying bowler in any form of the game. So very excited to see him. It looks as though James Smith will be making a debut. He's wildly talented player. I don't know if he'll keep wicket. Phil Salt will probably take the gloves. And he's talking about Jason Roy and kind of having people snapping at your heels. Will Phil Salt's sort of one of those guys. But Jamie Smith is really, really talented. He's the real deal, I think, as a batter. And obviously has done a lot of keeping over the course of the summer in the 100 and for Surrey and white ball cricket as well. So, he's yet another one of England's sort of keeper batters who could find themselves positioned in an order anywhere up and down. But he's a really, really talented batter, that is for sure.
Well, if the rain stays away, we could have 3 really fun games to end the summer. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week.
No problem.
As you might be aware from last week's show, in the build-up to the World Cup, we're looking back at vintage moments of World Cups gone by. And what better way to do this than with Laithwaite's wine and try and pair some of our favourite World Cup moments with some of their stunning wines. For our second vintage moment, we're going all the way back to 1975 and the first ever World Cup game between England and India at Lord's, where Sunil Gavaskar carried his bat for 36 of 174 deliveries. And the wine we're pairing this knock with is, Ben?
It's Split Rock. I was key in partnering wines with incidents, and this was one of the harder ones to figure out. But we figured that Gavaskar was the rock in this innings, and he split opinion. And that's the most tenuous of the links we've got. The others are.
I was going to say they do get better from here, folks. Don't worry. Did he really divide? Did that innings divide opinion?
No,
though?
that's true. I guess maybe it just had
everyone
opinion
thought
in
it was
one
slow.
direction. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
The crisp, fruit-filled Split Rock has been a best-selling Sauvignon for 2 decades at Laithwaite's. The vineyard comes from Nelson in New Zealand, the sunniest part of New Zealand, and they have since racked up a host of awards. The Split Rock is tropical, gooseberry fresh, and very Moorish. As we said on last week's show, the things that we do for you guys, cracking open a bottle of wine at 10:28 in the morning.
Yeah, I thought we were going to do an afternoon podcast. We've gone even earlier than last week.
We've gone even earlier. Anyway, this week we've got the author David Tossell in to talk about our vintage moment, as well as all the context around it and those pivotal early days in the history of Indian white ball cricket. As David gives us the context of that Gavaskar innings, we'll be enjoying our Split Rock in the studio. We're joined by the sports writer David Tossell, who has recently released a book called One Day at a Time, The History of Limited Overs Cricket in 25 Matches. Great to have you with us, David. Before we delve deeper into your book, let's start where we left off in the studio. Sunil Gavaskar's Go Slow. So for context, England scored 336 off their 60 overs. India fell 202 runs short in the 1975 World Cup, despite only losing 4 wickets, an almost painful run rate of 2.2 runs per over. Gavaskar, audaciously, you might argue, carried his bat for 36 off 174 deliveries. It's one of those tales you're told as a youngster falling in love with the game, but I don't actually know much about the context around it. I guess simply put, why did he bat so slowly?
Well, that's one of the great, almost unanswered questions. I mean, to get some of the context, I mean, that game, the first game of the 75 World Cup, the inaugural World Cup, was only the 19th ever one-day international. There'd only been 18 played in the 4.5 years since the format launched. England had played in 15 of those 18 games. India's only 2 one-day internationals have been 2 heavy defeats against England the previous summer in 74. So India went in with no great expectations and no great history in the format. England, as you say, racked up a big score. Dennis Amiss got the first World Cup 100, and 330 odd, even off 60 overs in those days, was a massive score. You were never getting scores approaching that regularly in the Gillette Cup, which was sort of the 60 over tournament at the time. So India went out, and as you say, Gavaskar 36 not out in 174 balls, only hit 1 boundary in 60 overs. Basically, just treated it as an extended net. I think that India went into bat with absolutely no expectation that they could chase the total down. There were various theories about whether Gavaskar was making a protest. First of all, a protest at Srini Venkatragavan being given the captaincy for the tournament. There was also a suggestion that he was protesting against Bishan Bedi being left out of the team for that game, and India going in with 4 seamers. I mean, Bedi, as we all know, a fantastic slow left armour, had a lot of success in one-day cricket, in English domestic cricket. In the end, Gavaskar ended up saying that he just played a bad innings. He was out of touch. He couldn't get off strike, which sounds a little bit unlikely, to be honest. I think a batsman of Gavaskar's stature, if he'd batted for 60 overs, would eventually have started to find the middle of the bat. I think it was just literally that he decided we've got no chance of winning this. Our chance in this competition is beating New Zealand in the game that was effectively going to decide second place in the group. I'll just get some practice. The Indian team put out a statement after the game, sort of condemning Gavaskar for his actions, but no action was taken. The interesting thing is, if you watch the little bit of footage that exists, there's this lovely bit at one point, which I mentioned in my book, where Indian fan comes out, and Gavaskar was God to Indian cricket fans, but he's standing there in his leather coat and his flared trousers, getting in Gavaskar's face, berating him, but had absolutely no impact at all. Gavaskar had to answer to the BCCI after the tournament as well, so there were some sort of ripples created by this, but in the end, it being Gavaskar and Indian cricket being nothing without Gavaskar at that time, it all just sort of fizzled away. But it is one of those great stories that sort of starts the whole folklore of the World Cup from game one.
Yeah, I seem to remember, I think there's an ODI at Lords 5 years ago now, when Dhoni sort of mismanaged a run chase and it involved him going quite slowly. And I think there were boos from the Lords crowd, and obviously in far less extreme circumstances than Gavaskar. I guess it also shows that India's attitudes to limited overs cricket in 1975 wasn't what it became quite soon after. What would you say was the turning point from the maybe protest from Gavaskar in 75 to what they are now as the leaders and pioneers of white ball cricket?
Yeah, I mean, the undoubted turning point, and it's very easy to point to, is the 83 World Cup. India still weren't that experienced in one-day cricket by then. They ended up playing West Indies in the final, who they'd beaten twice earlier in the year. They beat them for the first time in a one-day international in Guyana earlier in the year. And Kapil Dev, who was the captain, as they went into the tournament, said, "Look, we've done it once. This proves we can do it again." And it turned out they played them in the first game of the tournament in the group stages, beat them again, ended up unexpectedly beating England in the semi-final, and play West Indies again in the final. West Indies, who won both previous finals off the back of hundreds by Lloyd and Richards. They had Greenwich and Haynes opening the batting. They had probably the best fast ball 4-man attack that there's ever been. Roberts, Holding, Marshall and Gardner. India weren't given a prayer of winning that final, especially when they only got 180 odd. But then West Indies managed to mess up a small run chase against the dibbly-dobbly bowlers like Roger Binney and Mahinder Amarnath, and lost by 50 odd runs. And that really was the turning point. India that had always been cricket mad, but with greatest respect, had never actually been very good at it. The early 70s, they won a test match in England and beat the West Indies around the same time, and were kind of proclaiming themselves as world champions. But that didn't last. I mean, 3 years later, they came to England and got absolutely hammered again. So India suddenly were the best in the world, and India, from a sporting point of view, outside of Olympic hockey gold medals, had never really been able to say we were the best at anything in the world. So suddenly, all the stars aligned. You had India, the best team in the world. The TV market in India was opening up. More people were getting TV. More stations were coming in to rival the sort of state broadcasters. So there was then a competition for who can win the rights to show this team that is the best in the world. And suddenly, from there, you had kids like Tendulkar and Dravid remembering watching that final as a 10-year-old and growing up wanting to be one-day cricketers. You had money coming into the game in the way it never had done before in India through TV rights and through India being invited to take part in tournaments all over the world. And that really was the start of the journey to where we are today, where the vast majority of the global games income is both generated by and earned by India. And you can definitely identify 83 as the starting point of that.
So your book charts the history of limited overs cricket through 25 matches. If you were to pick out a couple of other like really pivotal moments in the development of limited overs cricket, what would you say?
I guess another one would be I've kind of covered it by talking about the first Kerry Packer floodlight international at the SCG in 78. I mean, Packer's cricket should never be underestimated in terms of its impact on the game, both from a financial point of view and the way that the game was marketed, but also if you look at the upcoming World Cup, most of the identifiable features of it, the fielding circle, the white ball, the coloured kit, the 50 overs, really comes directly from World Series cricket at the end of the 70s. So, and the game that really won Kerry Packer his war, if you like, against establishment cricket was the first time they were able to use the SCG, turn the lights on, and got 50,000 there for a game between Australia and the West Indies. That was the moment when Packers players who had spent a year playing in front of very sparse crowds and wondering, have we made the right decision here, looked at each other and thought, right, this is it, we've won. The country's behind us. We are the people's Australian cricket team. And it was at that moment, at the same time that the establishment Australian team was getting hammered by England. That was the moment when the ACB realised that they couldn't win the war with Kerry Packer. And Packer sort of got what he wanted, which was TV rights and the rights to market one-day international cricket. So that's another pivotal moment. And you look at another one, and as we're talking about the World Cup, the 92 World Cup semi-final, England-South Africa, vitally important because it really brought Duckworth-Lewis into the lexicon of cricket. We had that bizarre semi-final where South Africa went from needing 22 to win off 13 balls to 22 needed off one ball in the space of a 10-minute rain delay. And that was because of Richie Benaud. Richie Benaud had come up with this idea of, okay, average run rate isn't fair. We need to take into account a little bit more of the game situation. So we'll introduce this thing called the most productive overs system. So if you lost 2 overs batting, the other team lost their least productive overs, if you like. So only their 48 most productive overs counted. And that worked fine if it happened in between innings. So if you got 200 and you suddenly lost 5 overs, you took off the 5 overs where you scored fewest runs, it might be 5 maidens. So the team still needed 200, but off 45 overs. What happened in this England-South Africa game is the rain came with an over or 2 to go. And so they took away the overs at that point, which they went from having 13 balls left to 1 ball left and no change in the number of runs. So Frank Duckworth was watching this, and this is ridiculous, and got together with a mathematician called Tony Lewis, put together this system that they've been working on for a while, send it to the ICC, and the rest is history. We're still using Duckworth Lewis Stern as it is now, and I'm sure there will be a few games in the upcoming World Cup, especially given the doubts about the weather over there, that will be decided on that system.
It feels like this World Cup coming out is the last one of the current era in a way. That there aren't that many young players. Young players now who aren't playing international cricket don't get to play much domestic 50-over cricket. That's especially true in England, but it's similarly the case in other countries as well. What was your sense of where 50-over cricket in particular is heading? Because outside of major tournaments now, it's really taken a backseat to the proliferation of
I mean, I have to
T20s.
admit, I have real fears for the future of 50-over cricket and the World Cup. And as someone who remembers spending all of that first Saturday sat in front of grandstand watching the England-India game, and has always loved that format, it does worry me. The MCC have said that we need to cut down on the amount of 50-over cricket that's played in bilateral series after the 2027 World Cup. You're right. So few players now, seem to be interested in the format. They can get money out of T20. They can get the sort of the glory and the tradition, if you like, out of Test cricket. And if the players are not interested, then why should the fans be interested? ODI series, the ones that are left are increasingly going to be sort of second team against second team. And in the end, if 50 over as a format dies outside of World Cups, well, then what is the point of a World Cup? What's the point of having a World Cup in a sport that doesn't exist? No other sport would do that. And so you do fear. Obviously, this is the last one under the current format of 10 teams in a round robin, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. 14-team World Cup makes it more inclusive. Whether that is going to be enough to save the tournament, I have my doubts. I'm sure it will limp on for a while, but I'd be very surprised if someone is sitting here in 20 years' time talking to you about an upcoming 50-over World Cup, and that saddens me as someone who's seen so many great moments of the sporting history created in World Cups. I think it would be really sad, but I think it seems inevitable.
Well, I guess we better enjoy this one while it lasts.
Absolutely.
David, it's been great having you on. One day at a time, the history of limited overs cricket in 25 matches is available now. We'll leave a link in the description of this show for you to buy it. David, thanks again for your time.
Pleasure.
As a reminder, if you enjoy the sound of any of those wines we are drinking across the podcast, they are available at Laithwaite's. And don't forget, you can get 25% off when you buy 6 or more bottles with the code Wisden at checkout. In the Asia Cup, India demolished Sri Lanka in the final. They bowled them out for just 50. Mohammed Siraj took 6 wickets for not many runs. And at 15.2 overs, it was the shortest ever ODI innings by a full member. Ben, we talked about Bumrah last week, but Mohammed Siraj was an absolute joy to watch with that new ball.
Yeah, he was. And he is building up a record as a very, very important bowler in that India attack. I mean, that Shami-Bumrah pairing, I think people wouldn't have expected to be separated, but Siraj is now the second on in those seamers among, like, obviously after Bumrah. You could see Shami not playing, but if everyone's fit, you couldn't see Siraj not playing at this point. And yeah, it was just a crazy sort of game of cricket, really. I mean, in that, like, they even managed to pack quite a lot of instant into that 15 overs, like even before. So Siraj was the fastest fifer in ODI history, joint with Chaminda Vas in the 2003 World Cup.
Did he take 4 in one over?
He did get 4 in an over. So he started with a maiden where he beat, I think it was all Kissel Mendes, and he didn't get bat on ball the whole over. And then the second over was 4 wickets in it, and then but he also considered the 1-4, which is also funny because
it was a hat-trick ball, and they had 4 slips and a leg gully. So no mid-on, and Dhananjaya just defends it to mid-on, and the ball races away to the boundary, but there's no one there. So Siraj is the guy chasing it, and you can tell he's absolutely knackered. The gap between the end of that ball and the next one is enormous. But then he gets a wicket with the last ball of the over to take his 4th of the over. Obviously, some of the Sri Lankan batting wasn't great, but it is interesting. If the ball swings as much as that in the World Cup, we could get some pretty low-scoring games.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm trying to think, I guess you did have some openers making big scores in this tournament, but we saw in the 100, didn't we, that if the ball is moving around a bit, you almost wonder, people talk about, erosion of technique in Test cricket, but actually could this sort of go hard all the time mentality, could that also be contributing to when the ball is doing a bit, that then contributes to, teams aren't going to be content to be 30 for 1 at the end of 10 overs, and so will end up being 40 for 3 or 4 or 50 all out as it might be. But in India just look like they're all kind of peaking at the right time. Their players are all coming back to fitness. Like they're going to be very, very hard to stop. And this Asia Cup showed exactly why, I think.
In South Africa, South Africa ended up winning that ODI series against Australia, coming back from 2-0 down to win it 3-2. There was a ridiculous innings from Klaasen in the fourth ODI. He hit 174 of 83 balls as South Africa hit 416. Most relevant to us on the podcast, though, is I think this game happened just 1 or 2 days after the last podcast, where I think we all really bigged up Adam Zampa, basically saying he's the best spinner in the world at the moment. It wasn't a great day for Zampa as he equalled the world record for the most expensive 10-over spell in an ODI, 0 for 113, equaling Mick Lewis's record in that famous 438 game at Johannesburg in 2006. And South Africa won the decider, which was also Quinton de Kock's last ever home ODI. Marco Jansen put in a brilliant performance, taking a 5 for the ball and hitting 47 off 23 with the bat from number 7. Katya, we talked a little bit about Markram on last week's show, but you wrote a piece about how he could be really, really important to South Africa, and because he's been thought of as a great prospect for a long time, but he hasn't really done that much in ODI cricket.
Kind of a key theme of Markram's career, right? Being thought of as really great for a long time without necessarily kicking on to the heights that people thought he might reach early in his career. But this year in ODI cricket, he's genuinely been exceptional. So he didn't score a century for the 5 years in ODI cricket before this year and has now scored 2, including 175 or something against the Netherlands and then 1 against Australia. And if you look at that numbers 4 till 6 in South Africa's lineup with Markram in form, Klaasen and Miller, that's going to be really hard to stop when they get going. And I think we've been quite pessimistic about South Africa's chances in this World Cup, but it all seems to kind of be clicking together at the right time. You've got Bavuma and de Kock at the top, and then you've got that middle order. And I don't think they're necessarily going to be the most consistent side, but when they come together and when they all come off, they'll be absolutely explosive. The one weakness that Markram could be really important with, again, is that they don't really have many all-rounders in their squad. They've got Jansen, and Markram's some way short of an all-rounder, but his spin could be quite important in the World Cup. Like they've got Tabraiz Shamsi and Maharaj, neither of whom really bat. If they could get away with playing one of them and playing 4 quicks rather than 3 quicks, with Markram getting through a quota of overs, that would be really, really important for them and could be really helpful during the competition. So it's really good to see Markram finally come into form in ODIs. It's been kind of long overdue, but it's really good to watch.
I think you're right on South Africa. I think we probably have been a bit maybe pessimistic, but I think of all the 10 teams, I find them hardest to pick of where I wouldn't be that surprised if they came as low as 8th in the table, but I also wouldn't be particularly surprised if they got through to the semi-finals, because they've got lots of good players, but they're just not a clearly kind of very coherent unit, which in tournaments sometimes doesn't necessarily matter. If 3 or 4 players are in form, then that can just kind of carry you through. It doesn't really matter if your 8 is a little bit weak to bat at 8, if your top 6 is flying. So I think it's really, really hard to judge, but they've certainly got a lot of power in that middle order. I mean, Klaasen's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I guess we were quite hot on Australia as well, maybe last week, talking about their gung-ho approach, and
they also weren't at full strength for this series, which is worth remembering.
They weren't, that's true, but I guess that was on the bowling side, and they still were going that hard with the bat and then kind of coming up short, and it's quite a hard thing to instill, I suppose, that attacking mentality. And whenever you come from 2-0 up to 3-2 down, Australia seems to be quite good at letting leads slip away recently, but also they've had Travis Head get injured, haven't they? And he might well be out of the tournament.
So he's ruled out of the first half of the tournament.
Looks like they're going to keep him around and then hope he can play the back end.
It's been a really bad week for World Cup injuries. Like several like key players might be out for the whole thing, or even significant portions.
We didn't mention Tim Southey, did we? Who
Yeah.
broke and dislocated his thumb and is having surgery next week, I think, and then they'll judge whether he can play any part in that World Cup.
Naseem Shah might be ruled out for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Wanindu Hasaranga, similarly.
Jason Roy as well, I guess, is sort of in that camp. So yeah, but yeah,
I missed the Hasaranga injury. Is that serious? Is it?
Was reported last night. I think they're assessing how serious it is, but they are worried.
Right. I mean, that's huge for them.
Yeah. So the other thing about South Africa is just conditions in South Africa are just so different to what you get in the World Cup. I almost don't know how relevant this is. Like with Markram, I actually wouldn't be surprised if he has quite a bad World Cup with a bat and a really good one with the ball. So different are conditions in South Africa. Moving on, Cricket 24 is a culmination of a decade of cricket video game development and includes teams from every corner of the globe. Players will be able to take on major cricket nations, including Australia, England, West Indies, New Zealand, Ireland, and more. Plus, for the first time ever, professional Indian T20 teams, all set in over 50 detailed official stadia. Cricket 24 is the most complete video game simulation of the game that we've seen to date. The game is out on the 5th of October, and you can pre-order it at www.bigant.com/cricket24. We'll leave a link for that in the description. Ben, what is your moment of the week?
My moment of the week is Leicestershire winning the One Day Cup final in what I
What
think,
a win!
And
What a win!
Haskenam's one of the great English domestic One Day finals, right? I mean, when you go through the whole game, I know the One Day Cup is an interesting place in the English game now, but just as a game of cricket, this was incredible. I mean, to go through it, I'm not sure people have followed it how closely. So Leicestershire were 19 for 4 early on, and then their captain Lewis Hill sort of tries to hold things together, but is out for 42. That point, they're 89 for 6. And into bat walks Harry Swindles, who at this point, his contract is expiring at the end of the season. He hasn't played a game in the One Day Cup to this point, and then goes about hitting 117 off 96, not out, to take them up to 267. I'm not sure if he's since signed a contract or if Alfonso Thomas, the coach, was saying like he is going to be signing a contract on Monday. Don't you worry. But yeah, so then they get up to, but that's still only a defendable total. And the chase is just one of those brilliant ones that you get in 50 other games that totals around that, where it kind of swings all the way through. I don't think Hampshire ever that far ahead. I guess when they're 218 for 5, you'd say they're pretty close. And then off the last ball of the 48th, Dawson, I think, hits a 6. At that point, they need 11 off 12, and you think that's the game sewn up. And then Chris Wright and Josh Hull, who are the two leading wicket takers from the competition. Josh Hull was born after Chris Wright made his professional debut, which I think that shows how like this Leicestershire side is a bit of the kind of mishmash that Leicestershire sides can be, where you get players who are coming through on their first chances or coming back for their last chances and that sort of thing. They combine to not go for a boundary between them, and Leicestershire win it by 2 runs. And the scenes are just, they had a massive travelling support there who were, chanting all through the game. Everyone was talking about it afterwards. And it's just, a great story for them, considering where they were earlier this season. Paul Nixon had left in circumstances which are still a bit murky. Chris Wright is one of 3 players who are leaving at the end of the season. That will happen in the space of about a week. And the CEO then was having to say, we're not in crisis, which is not that great a thing to have to say. And now there's still a possibility they might get promoted. And I guess that's become slightly more likely with other news that's happened this week, we'll talk about later on. And they've got this first one-day trophy since 1985. And it's just a wonderful moment for a club that are doing some really good things and don't get the credit for it sometimes, I guess.
Katya, what's your moment of the week?
My moment of the week was from last week, which was Nat Silverbrunt's century in the final ODI of the summer at Leicester. I went to Leicester and was fully prepared to watch it rain all day, and instead got treated to one of the best innings ever in an England women's ODI shirt. She was playing her 100th ODI and was also captaining because Heather Knight had a stomach bug. Lovely detail from John Lewis in the presser that she was throwing up in the bathroom. So, great.
Necessary information.
Yeah. 66 ball century, the fastest by an England women's player in ODI. She scored 120 off 74 balls. The only slight complaint I have was that in the box at Leicester, we could only see a third of the pitch. So it was kind of touch and go as to whether she'd scored a 6 or a 4. But Maya Boucher was also really good in that innings. She scored 95 off 65, and England were recovering from 18 for 2 at that point, and they had a nearly 200-run partnership. I think it was 193 in the end. That match also had Charlie Dean's maiden international fifer, which was really good to see. She took 3 wickets in 1 over at one point. And it was England's best series of the tour, including the T20 series that they obviously lost. However, I think you can kind of say that Sri Lanka didn't play massively well. It didn't seem, not to take anything away from Charlie Dean, but it didn't seem like she had to do too much more than turn her arm over in order to get the wickets. She did bowl really well, and it's obviously encouraging to see, particularly with Sophie Ecclestone having dislocated her shoulder, that England have got someone like her to come in as an off spinner and fill that role. And John Lewis was glowing about her in the press conference. They were sat next to each other, and she was turning a brighter shade of red with every sentence that came out of his mouth. And it was an interesting contrast, that T20I series, and I think it shows how important Nat Sivabrunt is to that side. That's her 3rd ODI century of the summer, the first 2 of which came against Australia, and now her 2nd, I think, in a winning cause.
It does feel like her game's gone up another level in the last year or so.
Ridiculous. And it is important that she wasn't playing in that T20 series. Even when she's not bowling, as she isn't at the minute, what she brings to that side is just another level of performance. They've got match winners throughout their side, but she's the one who does it on such a consistent basis. And she's so invaluable to them, not just in terms of the runs, but what she brings to the field. To have someone like her who can step in when Heather Knight is ill and captain in the way she did, and partner Bouchier in the way she did as well, that's so important. And it's another reminder to kind of cherish her while she's still in the England side, and make sure we never forget how lucky that England are to have her at the minute.
Well, her stats, just since the start of last year, she's scored 500 and 550s from 21 innings, averaging over 70, a strike rate of about 100. So yeah, she's
pretty
done
good.
quite well over the last year or so.
I mean, she's a brilliant player across all formats. Very, very good T20 player, but ODI cricket, she has just absolutely got a nail. When she's got that bit of time to play herself in, which she doesn't generally start hugely explosively, she does like to take those first few balls to have a look. But then when she gets going, she's just absolutely unstoppable. And 50 over cricket really gives her that ability to go through the gears. And Sri Lanka didn't stand a chance in that game.
Joe, what's your moment of the week?
My moment of the week is the day that county fans thought would never come. Tim Mercer is retiring. He's only 42 as well.
At least another 2 years left.
And
also, he's going quite well this week as well.
Yeah, well, he's playing in his final home game as we speak. Had a very, very Middlesexy day on day one, where he came out to bat at 100 for 9, and by the end of the day had 3 for 17, which basically sums up the last decade of his time at Middlesex. What an extraordinary career he's had. Those wickets yesterday took his first-class career tally for Middlesex alone up to 838. He'll probably have a few more by the time you're listening to this. 954 in all first-class cricket. And it's just been a brilliant career. Started out here at Surrey. Did well for them, but that was when Surrey just had I suppose they still do, just a lineup of internationals, and he was on the fringes. He got a game when players would go and play for England, but didn't get that many opportunities. And it was Alan Butcher's dad, who was Surrey coach at the time, and said, I think you're best off going to Middlesex. Like, you'll get more opportunities, and the conditions at Lords should suit you pretty well. And Al Butch was absolutely nailed on with that. Another Butcher-Murtagh connection, weird bit of trivia. Tim Murtagh and his brother Chris actually grew up in the same bedroom as Mark and Gary Butcher. So the Murtaghs bought the Butcher's house off them. So that's 2 Surrey players replacing 2 Surrey players in that bedroom. So whatever was going on in that house, it's got some good cricketing vibes. Yeah, I just wanted to pick out a few stats from his career, really, because when you play for this long, the stats kind of sum it up. So he's taken 50 first-class wickets in a season on 9 separate occasions, 35 5-wicket hauls for Middlesex. He's the leading county championship wicket taker of the 21st century, which he actually wasn't aware of. I told him this during an interview when he was trying to sort out his contract with Middlesex, and said you might want to mention that in your job interview or your job reapplication. Which he said, yeah, thanks, that's a good one to use. And he's taken 1,000 wickets for Middlesex across all formats, and he'll be putting that knowledge to good use. After 23 seasons on the county circuit, he's now going to be a full-time coach at Middlesex. He's already been doing a bit of that this year. And also, I've spoken to him numerous times over the years. He's just a really, really top bloke. really engaging, bright, really good communicator, a funny bloke. I think he just seems made for coaching, so I'm sure he's going to go on and have a successful career. And I haven't even mentioned the Ireland stuff as well.
I was going to say, a test match 5 goal and a test match 50 as well.
Yeah, well played, Tim.
An amazing career, and as we said, he's still going strong in his 43rd year. Elsewhere in the Championship, we are in the middle of the penultimate round of games. There's a title race and a relegation battle in Division 1. Surrey are hosting Northants, Essex at home to Hampshire, and they had a very good first day, actually, finishing 310 for 6. A really, really good partnership between Adam Rossington and Matt Critchley, because Essex didn't actually start that well, lost a couple of early wickets. Rossington scored 100 at the time of recording. Critchley is 87 not out. Not only do Essex need to win that game to realistically keep their hopes alive, they also want to pick up as many batting bonus points as possible, because that could be crucial if Surrey step up either at home to Northants or on the last day of the season, which I think is Hampshire away. In the relegation battle, as we mentioned, Middlesex were bowled out for 121 at home to Warwickshire, and Kent conceded 214 for 2 on the first day against Somerset. So neither side going particularly well at the moment. Again, you think that bonus points might come into play there.
Can I jump in with my murder stat?
Yes.
He was the first number 11 to score 25 plus in both innings of a test match, because he'd got
That
27 earlier in the match.
That is good. Ben, in Division 2, the big story was that Sussex have been docked 12 points. Their captain, Cheteshwar Pujara, has been suspended, and 3 other players have been dropped for this week's game. Can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah, so it's sort of a totting up of discipline breaches, 2 of which came against Leicestershire, 2 came earlier in the season, one of which actually involved Pujara. I think he must have maybe hit the stumps this bout after getting out or something like that. It was mistreatment of cricket equipment anyway. This happened in their game against Leicestershire, which Sussex looked to have won. Well, they did win to reignite their promotion hopes, I guess. But it was also a very fraught, tense ending where Leicestershire ended up losing by 15 runs.
This is when they nearly chased down 500.
Exactly, yeah. So, and I think it was during those partnerships where things started to bubble over. So managed to dig out what one of the incidents was, which was Ben Cox was running 2, basically, and as he went to run the single, Jack Carson just sticks his foot out to try and trip him up, basically, which is pretty cheeky. And yeah, the Ari Carvelis one, who is a player who's been suspended but isn't one of these 2 breaches so far, is because that's a more serious incident that's being investigated, and the ECB won't say more at this point, but there's reports, I think, in the Cricketer about the nature that might be, so that could be quite serious. I guess there's possibly a deeper point about Sussex, that we've talked a lot about their kind of extreme youth policy and all these young players that they have in that side. And actually, we've maybe been a bit surprised by how many of them have actually gone on to be quite successful county cricketers already, I suppose. But that is also, there is maybe a knock-on effect there that is a squad without a huge amount of sort of leadership experience in there. I mean, Tom Haynes was captain at a very young age, and now Pujara is captain now, but India haven't seen him as a huge captaincy option. Maybe that's a squad lacking a bit of leaders, and maybe that bubbled over a bit and has done a few times over the season.
They don't have that many players who are like late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, so that I don't know if they'll be looking at that for next season, or if they'll just hope that these guys sort of mature and they just kind of lost their heads a bit, basically, in what was a very important, very tense game of cricket. But yeah, that's their promotion charge over pretty much. And it's kind of, Leicestershire have started decently in that game against Yorkshire, but I guess rain will have just a big part to play over this round, and that could end up actually doing Durham quite a favour, because if they get away from could do Worcester a favour, because if they get away from Durham with a draw, then actually they'd be pretty happy with that, knowing that Durham have to play Leicestershire next week. So we'll see what happens. Leicestershire still have a small chance, but Worcester very heavy favourites, I guess. Yeah,
definitely. Joe, to finish up, the latest Wisden Cricket Monthly is out this week, and it feels heavier.
It is heavier. It is literally heavier. It's got some extra pages because it's World Cup, and we want to celebrate World Cup with more stuff. So yeah, 116 pages compared to the usual 100. There's 40 odd pages dedicated to the World Cup itself. Really happy with how it turned out. Really like the cover. We have a little kind of think tank of the cover when the cover gets sent round, and we usually get everyone's got their say, and you have to change this, that, or appease people. And this time everyone was like, yeah, we like that. There was literally no other feedback, so that was good. So we've got brilliant intro to the World Cup section from David Tossell, who you'll have heard from earlier in the podcast, on the kind of golden past and the precarious future of the 50 over World Cup. We've got articles on all of the 10 teams competing, interviews with Chris Wokes, Travis Head, Baz DeLeader, Devon Conway, Jonathan Trott, who's coaching Afghanistan, of course, and then some really nice writing. Jeff Lemon profiles Mitchell Stark. We've got Andrew Fidel Fernando on Hasaranga. Adja Sharma's done a lovely piece on Shubman Gill, and Ben did a great piece on Shakib Al Hassan as well. And then alongside that, Phil and I pick out a handful of unlikely World Cup icons from past tournaments. Chris Harris, Colin Zabuya, those kind of names. Actually, yeah, Ben and Ace, you'll love that one. That's a field day.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And Taha, who's still knocking about, he did a feature for us on the 100 in its third year, asking, is it time to finally start talking about the cricket rather than all the merry-go-round around it? I spoke to Kate Cross and her dad, David Cross, who was a centre forward who won didn't win the World Cup, won the FA Cup with West Ham. And Kate's really candid in that, talking about the pressure of living up to the family name and how that's impacted her mental health across the course of her career. We've got stories from all 18 counties, and then some really good columns in there. We've got Lawrence Booth on Heath Streak and corruption. Andrew Miller on slow over 8 penalties. You've got to have something on slow over 8 penalties, otherwise it's not a cricket magazine these days. And Mark Ramprakash on the enduring appeal of the county championship. And possibly the best of the lot, certainly our designer Joe, who fosters dogs, said this was his favourite article we've ever done in the magazine. Niall O'Brien tells Jim Wallace how getting a dog changed his life. That's a very sweet piece. His dog Sandy, who turned him from a bit of a hellraiser to a teenager who could focus on his cricket, and says this dog basically turned him into a professional cricketer, not through coaching, but just through being a source of responsibility.
Yeah,
inspired him to yap behind the stumps, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The magazine, as always, is available at wisden.com/shop. Head there if you want to get the magazine, or subscribe to the magazine. I think we were talking about it just after you guys went to print last week, that how good a deal it is. It is such a good deal.
Such a good deal.
For 116 pages. It is
almost too good a deal.
It is almost
really.
too good a deal.
We might have to look at this in future. Get it at this price while you can.
We might need to have a conversation about that in the next week or so. Anyway, thank you so much, Katya, Ben, Joe. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Well done for getting to the end. It's been a long episode. If you've enjoyed it, if you got this far, we think you might have done, feel free to tell your friends about it.